Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Peter Alexander here in Washington. As we like to say around these parts, if it's Tuesday, voters are voting somewhere. Today, that somewhere is the state of Michigan, a key battleground this fall where Republicans and Democrats are holding presidential primaries and where protest votes to the likely nominees in both parties are also taking center stage. First, the Republican side. This is the second Donald Trump versus Nikki Haley matchup in 4 days, with Haley looking to solidify that 40% of the anti-Trump vote that she notched in South Carolina and New Hampshire as we head into Super Tuesday, just 1 week from today. On the Democratic side, the protest vote against President Biden is not a rival candidate, but rather what's essentially a vote of no confidence. Michigan primary voters are allowed to cast uncommitted ballots, and many activists with roots in the state's sizable Arab and Muslim American communities are pushing Michiganders to vote uncommitted as a way to protest the president's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Progressives have been ratcheting up their pressure on the president to stop backing Israel's military campaign in Gaza. And while not the permanent ceasefire that those voters want, President Biden said last night that a pause in fighting could be coming soon.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
Organizers say the uncommitted campaign's goal is to notch 10,000 votes today, but that number would actually be notably smaller than what is considered a typical uncommitted turnout in the state's Democratic primary. Check this out. Michigan's last 3 Democratic primaries all saw about 20,000 uncommitted ballots in each cycle, even when there was not an organized campaign pushing people to vote that way. President Biden won Michigan in November 2020, by the way, by more than 100,000 votes. Still, today's results, they really could highlight what is a political liability for President Biden at a moment that other vulnerabilities are also on display. That includes his handling of the crisis at the southern border with Mexico, an issue that Donald Trump clearly wants to try to make central to his presidential campaign. A new Monmouth poll has 61% of adults calling illegal immigration a very serious problem. That includes 41% of Democrats and 58% of independents. President Biden is scheduled to head to the border on Thursday, where he is certain to criticize House Republican efforts to block a bipartisan border security and foreign aid bill. The 81-year-old president is also continually fighting concerns over his age. And here's how he tried to brush aside those concerns yesterday on a late-night appearance with Seth Meyers.
You are currently 81 years old.
Who the hell told you that?
Yeah.
That's classified.
That's classified. How do you address that concern going forward as you come up to the 2024 election?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you got to take a look at the other guy. He's about as old as I am. It's about how old your ideas are. Look, I mean, this is a guy who wants to take us back. He wants to take us back on Roe v. Wade. He wants to take us back on a whole range of issues. And I really think his views on where to take America are older than... Anyway, I don't want to get going.
Part of President Biden's conversation just yesterday with Seth Meyers on NBC. NBC's Mike Memoli is on the ground in Dearborn, Michigan for us, the heart of that state's Arab American population. Mike, it's a voting day on both sides. Uncommitted organizers, they appear to be trying to manage the expectations with this sort of 10,000 vote target. How likely, based on your reporting there, is that they hit that total? And what are folks on the ground telling you?
Well, Peter, based simply on the historical track record, it's likely that the uncommitted vote will be more than those, let's just say, they're carefully managed expectations of 10,000. And this is such an unusual primary so far, Peter, right? We had the New Hampshire primary where President Biden wasn't even on the ballot, got 60% of the vote. He's got 96% of the vote in South Carolina, about 90% in Nevada. No one in Nevada, yeah. No one really knows where this is going to end up here in Michigan, in part because this is also the first time Michigan is voting in this earlier window. It is notable, though, that this was Michigan's move into the early window was meant to highlight some of the strengths of President Biden with key voting coalitions like black voters, like union members. And instead, it just has put a real spotlight on his handling of foreign policy and the concern many Democrats have over his support for Israel and the humanitarian crisis, really, that we're seeing in Gaza. And that's really been front and center with some of the voters we've been talking to today. Take a listen.
What made us come out and vote today, I think, is the desire for peace, the desire to put pressure on the current administration for a ceasefire.
Our foreign policy needs to be changed and needs to be shifted, not just because Ramadan is coming or because already 12,000 or 10,000 children have passed away or killed, murdered in this case, innocently. That shouldn't be the result. That shouldn't take his decision. His decision should have been made in the beginning of the wars.
So, Peter, we're starting to get that rush hour surge of voting here where we are in Dearborn. It was interesting. This Michigan does have some new laws making it easier to vote earlier and absentee. And the Michigan Secretary of State said that before polls even opened today, 1 million ballots had been cast in both primaries. And notably, she said there had been strong turnout in Ann Arbor. Now, you know Michigan, you know the geography of Ann Arbor. That's a college town. And there has been significant, of course, activism among young voters in particular about Gaza. So a potential important turnout clue for what we might see later tonight when the numbers start rolling in.
Mem, you and I have these conversations all day privately, but now that we're on camera together having this conversation, I want to get your take, what you're hearing since we last spoke about how seriously the Biden campaign is taking this protest. Is there a level of concern that this really does have implications that go well beyond the primary?
Well, of course, Peter, these conversations are more fun off camera, but we'll, for the purposes of this conversation with a lot of other people watching, listen, the Biden campaign is concerned about what they're seeing tonight, but they're also downplaying it. They say, listen, we are hearing these voters. There has been efforts on the part of the campaign to send top officials, maybe not the president. He's only come to campaign here once, but others to hear the concerns. And it was interesting talking with, for instance, the Michigan Democratic Party chairwoman today. She said, listen, you can tell the president has been listening to these concerns because of those comments he made yesterday, ice cream cone in hand, talking about a ceasefire being likely. They also have drawn a distinction between a pressure campaign now to try to influence the president's foreign policy and what these voters will do in November. They say those voters will be behind the president when it counts in November. A big question, though. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll be watching over the course of the day. Mike Memley, stay safe on the trail. We'll talk to you a little bit later, my friend. And joining us now is Michigan Democratic State Representative Abraham Aiyash. He is the majority leader in the Michigan House of Representatives and is backing the uncommitted campaign in the state. We really appreciate your being with us, sir. I want to ask you out of the gates. Last week, organizers were shooting for about 20,000 uncommitted votes. Today, we're hearing 10,000 is the goal. For the uncommitted campaign, what would you view as success?
I think success would be record turnout. If you look at the concerns of the Democratic coalition, it is a multiracial, multi-religious coalition that says we do not believe the United States should be funding war. The United States should not be backing any initiative that is killing any innocent man, woman, and child. And we've seen that happen over the last 140 days. So I think tonight we're expecting to have a very strong showing, and we will see that once the polls close. We saw record turnout. I was proud to vote for legislation that allowed voting to happen early, and we're going to see the results of that tonight.
So, Leader Aiyash, just to be very clear about that, record turnout for whom? Record turnout overall, record turnout for the uncommitted number? Because the 10,000 goal that was set is obviously well below the number that it's been in the past. So just to be clear here, for whom are you looking to see a record, and what does that record need to be?
We want to see people turn out and vote. I think that is the ultimate goal. And what we are seeing,
even if not for the uncommitted,
Well, look, as somebody who's in politics, it's always a good thing to turn out and vote. But I will say you are going to see a significant number of folks turning out to vote uncommitted, which is why it's reflecting in the organizing efforts that we're seeing all across our state.
So let me ask you about what Governor Whitmer told us about the president's handling of the conflict just yesterday. I'll play that for our audience.
I have spoken with the president. I've spoken with a lot of people about it, and I keep very close with our Arab American community. I understand that, there is a lot of different feelings on this, and strong ones, and pain that people are feeling. And yet I also know that we have a president who is working 24/7 to try to bring calm to the region and peace to the region. He is, I think, working incredibly hard to resolve what is happening.
He's working incredibly hard to resolve what is happening. Do you accept that assessment, Leader Aiyash?
He certainly has not done enough. when you see 30,000 dead innocent men, women, and children in Gaza, and you saw that the president, for the large part of this war, did not speak out forcefully against the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, it is only now that we're seeing a shift in that messaging. And that's largely because of the organizing efforts that we've done here in Michigan and the conversations that we've had with the White House.
So to be clear, do you think he's responding to your concerns, though, that having heard the White House has had multiple meetings with members of your community during their visit?
More than having meetings, what we need to see is the White House must act on this issue. We have been very clear. A permanent ceasefire, ending the funding of these bombs that are killing innocent men, women, and children, and restoring humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza. That has been our position from the start, and we keep pushing for that, and we have yet to see that happen, and we will continue to push that through our efforts tonight and beyond as we enter the rest of this year.
So yesterday, the president said he's hopeful that there could be a ceasefire. He was specific. He said by Monday. If there is a ceasefire, or if this war ends before November, do you believe that uncommitted voters in Michigan will be willing to vote for the president, or is that relationship, in your view, irreparably damaged?
You know, I think the way it's framed is not as transactional as I think many people want it to look like. It's not if you have a ceasefire, if you stop the killing, it's in exchange for votes. What we are saying is the president has not listened to the call of majority of Americans, 70+% of Democrats, 60+% of Americans that have said, we do not want the United States to fund a war that is killing innocent men, women, and children. So we are pushing back on that, and we are hoping that the president will heed the calls of his constituency, and that is the most democratic thing to do. And we are using this election today to send that message so that come November, there is not a conversation around, are there still people in Palestine undergoing a genocidal campaign by Benjamin Netanyahu?
So to be clear, as my understanding is, I mean, the president's right now, he says that Israel has gone over the top in its actions there. He's been trying to put more pressure on them. Obviously, that's not sufficient without a ceasefire for you. But just to be very clear, what specifically do you need to see, I know it's not as transactional as you just noted, to feel satisfied that the president has made significant change in the direction of what not just the Arab and Muslim American communities say, but a broad number of Americans are saying right now?
We've been very clear. Restoring humanitarian aid, ending this unconditional funding to Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu's radical regime, and a permanent ceasefire to usher in Palestinian statehood and safety and security for all of those that live in the region. It's not a complicated ask, nor is it a radical ask. We are asking the United States to lead with peace, to lead with moral clarity, and to stop funding any initiative that is killing innocent men, women, and children, which we have seen 30,000 Palestinians have now suffered through. And unfortunately, every hour that goes by, 2 more Palestinian mothers die, and that is unacceptable if the U.S. is funding that effort.
One last question for you, if I can. You told Politico recently, quote, it is insulting when people tell Arab and Muslim American communities that if you don't support Biden, you're effectively supporting former President Trump. If that is the ballot in November, isn't that sort of the way ultimately that it would be working, that if you're not supporting President Biden, you would be in effect supporting a Trump campaign?
Today, we're supporting an uncommitted effort to allow this president and this administration to change course on this issue. Look, my uncle was killed in an airstrike 3 days before the travel ban was signed. So if anyone knows the personal pain of President Trump's policies, it's people like me and people like my community. We recognize the danger of Donald Trump, and I know he's a threat to democracy. So the question has to be asked to the candidate, not to the voters. What is President Biden willing to do to protect and save this democracy? Is he going to listen to the will of the people, or will he continue to be a pacifist as it relates to allowing Benjamin Netanyahu to dictate whatever terms that he wants that has resulted in the killing of 30,000 people? So the question is for the president. We stand with democracy and not genocide, and I hope the president will do the same. We will stand with anyone that does that.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Michigan State Representative Abraham Aiyash, I very much appreciate you making time to share your perspective with us. Thank you. And as we did mention, it is Trump versus Haley in Michigan's Republican primary vote today, where just a portion of the state's delegates are on the line thanks to some complicated and confusing rules in this contest, as well as some internal Republican chaos. NBC's Shaq Brewster is on the ground in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Steve Kornacki is at the big board with what and where he is watching tonight. First, Michigan is also set to be the last primary before Super Tuesday, which Trump rival Nikki Haley is pinning her hopes on. Shaq, so what are you hearing from voters there and what they're looking for?
Well, they're coming out for different reasons, Peter. I'll tell you, some people say that this is a raw political calculation. Some folks who have said that they're supporting Nikki Haley told me that they're only doing so as a method and means to stop Donald Trump. I've heard Trump supporters come out and say that this is about the issues for them. They like what they saw under President Trump's leadership, and they want him back in the White House. And I heard from folks who are supporting President Joe Biden, and they point to the economy, the overperforming economy. They say that they want more of that leadership, and they think that he is the only option to fight this battle against Trump. I believe we have some sound from some of the voters that I've been talking to. Let's try to play some of that now.
I'm not been traditionally a Republican, but the last years have had me leaning more toward Democrat. But
why didn't you vote for Biden this time?
Because I feel it's more important at this point to let people know that there is an alternative in the Republican Party.
The Republican Party I'm almost embarrassed with sometimes, just in terms of how they have handled things.
You say that as a Republican.
Yes, exactly. I'm a moderate Republican. The party is leaving me.
And this is a unique part of the state. We're in Kent County, a swing county as of late, especially when you look at these recent cycles. It's a place where Nikki Haley is hoping to have a stronger performance than what you would see statewide. And at least according to some of those people that I talked to, you do have some people coming out because of her attention in this area.
Shaq, on the Republican side, there's also a primary, but the delegate allotment works a little differently there. Walk us through how the GOP handles things in Michigan.
I think they're trying to confuse all of us, Peter. If you look at the delegates, we know that 55 delegates are up for grabs in this primary, but only 16 of those delegates will be allocated based on the results of what you see at the polls tonight. The rest, the 39 remaining delegates, will be allocated at state conventions, plural, that will take place on Saturday, both in Grand Rapids and Detroit. Why are there multiple conventions? Well, there are currently dueling or rival or competing leaders of the state Republican Party. You have the former leader who still has control of the email list and the website. She is having a convention in Detroit, and you have the Trump-backed leader, a former representative, having a convention in Grand Rapids. It's very confusing, very complicated, but by the end, we will know how this all shakes out.
Equally confusing, the fact that it is 71 degrees in late February in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
I am not complaining.
We'll save that conversation for another time. It's much better than my experiences covering the campaign this time of year there. Shaq, enjoy it. Have some fun out there reporting. Appreciate your getting to us. We want to turn now to Steve Kornacki. He's at the big board. Steve, what are you watching in tonight's results?
Okay, a couple of big storylines here on the Republican side, the Democratic side, where to watch tonight as this lights up with all the results. Start on the Republican side here, because the question is, Donald Trump clearly had a big advantage in this in all of the primaries, but how well could Nikki Haley do here? Could she hit that 40% number she got in South Carolina and New Hampshire? If she's going to do something like that, where to look first and foremost is right in this area. That is Kent County, where Grand Rapids is. Right next door is Ottawa County. That's where Holland is. And there's a region in here that combined makes up about 17% of all the Republican votes cast statewide. That's about 1 out of every 6. And what makes this region so unique, and one you need to watch to see how Haley is doing, is that this was the most Trump-resistant portion of the state in the 2016 Republican presidential primaries. It is a traditionally Republican and conservative area, but remember, in 2016, when Trump was running the first time, he got 37% of the vote in the Michigan primary. Not so in Kent County. Look at this. In Kent County in 2016, he got 23%. Next door in Ottawa County, he got about 19%, almost about half of what he got statewide. So this whole area in here was a huge, huge weak source for Donald Trump in 2016. Is it again tonight? Is it a source of strength for Haley? Does that give her an impressive performance statewide? In terms of the Democratic race here, call that up on the screen. Go back to the statewide here. The storyline here, it's Biden. Dean Phillips, the congressman's on the ballot, but this is what worries the Biden campaign. Uncommitted activists activists who oppose Biden's policy on the Israel-Hamas war are encouraging Democrats to vote uncommitted as a protest against Joe Biden. If that is getting any traction tonight, we can look in two big places for it. The first is the biggest county in the state, Wayne County, where Detroit is. It is also where the city of Dearborn, Michigan is. Dearborn, with over 100,000 residents, it is majority Arab American. It has the largest concentration of Muslim Americans per capita of any city in the country. So take a look at Wayne County, and in particular Dearborn, to see if uncommitted is registering. And also take a look next door in Washtenaw County, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan University. We've seen a lot of activation on college campuses against Joe Biden's policy on Israel and Hamas. We've certainly seen polling that shows younger college-age voters are most opposed to that policy. Again, look in this county to see if that segment of voters is actually turning out and checking off the uncommitted option here. If you're not seeing it there, in those two places, you're probably not seeing it anywhere.
Steve Kornacki at the big board. Steve, thank you so much. And coming up next here, Oval Office sit down inside President Biden's tense meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson and Capitol Hill's top congressional leaders as Washington tries to avert a partial government shutdown that could happen as early as the end of this week. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President Biden hosted the top 4 congressional leaders at the White House today as lawmakers scramble to try to avert a partial government shutdown by the end of this week. The president, I should say, telling those lawmakers at the White House it's Congress's responsibility to fund the government, warning that a government shutdown would damage the economy, in his words, quote, significantly. Following their meeting, there was cautious bipartisan optimism from both Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries that a shutdown could be avoided. Johnson also told reporters that he engaged in a separate one-on-one meeting briefly with the president in the Oval Office. Looming over all of this, of course, is the president's emergency supplemental request for foreign aid that's been stalled in Congress for months and that remains a major point of contention on Capitol Hill.
The meeting on Ukraine was one of the most intense I have ever encountered in my many meetings in the Oval Office. I said I've been around here a long time. It's maybe 4 or 5 times that history is looking over your shoulder. And if you don't do the right thing, whatever the immediate politics are, you will regret it.
There was discussion about the supplemental spending package, and I was very clear with the president and all those in the room that the House is actively pursuing and investigating all the various options on that, and we will address that in a timely manner. But again, the first priority of the country is our border and making sure it's secure.
Joining me now is NBC's Sahil Kapoor. He's on Capitol Hill for us. Sahil, walk us through this. I was there listening to the remarks from both the Democrats and the Republican leaders there. Did this meeting, though, from your reporting at the White House, move the ball on government funding? What are the sort of key sticking points that need to be sorted out on that as we reach this week's deadline?
It does seem to have moved the ball a little bit, Peter. The vibes were positive coming out of this White House meeting. Everyone seemed to be in agreement that they're moving towards a resolution here. Mike Johnson, talked about how they're working in good faith to resolve it as soon as possible, literally working around the clock. Senator Chuck Schumer, who had floated the possibility that yet another stopgap, yet another short-term bill may be necessary to prevent a government shutdown on Friday, declined to entertain questions about that after a Democratic Senate lunch when I had asked him about it, saying simply that they're getting closer. He feels they can get this done. The biggest sticking point, Peter, is the policy add-on, the so-called riders in these government funding bills. They had largely settled the top-line amount in terms of how much the government would spend, usually a holdup in prior government funding bills. That has been resolved. What's the holdup now has been largely House Republican demands for conservative policy measures to insert in this. And, of course, Democrats in the Senate and President Biden are not willing to accept a lot of the demands that House Republicans are putting forward. So where does that leave us? There are just a little over 72 hours until the Friday midnight deadline, and Mike Johnson has said he's going to give members at least 72 hours to read the bill. That doesn't leave much time to get this done in time, even if the House were to release, to close the deal and release the bill tonight, they'd have to start moving very, very quickly and hope the Senate gets it done. So that's probably the single biggest obstacle to averting a shutdown in time, given that time is running short, and that they would have to not only strike the deal, but also pass it through both chambers. Of course, this is just part of the government, Peter. This is a March 1st deadline for certain agencies like Veterans Affairs and Energy, the March 8th deadline for other parts of the government, like the Department of Justice and HHS, will be even tougher than this.
Yeah, no doubt. Department of Defense, HHS, you said. So we get to do this all over again is the good news, sadly, for most Americans. I want to ask you, the president's supplemental, that's the money for Ukraine, for the Indo-Pacific, specifically Taiwan, for Israel, was also discussed in this meeting at the White House. I was struck in listening to this that it didn't sound like Speaker Johnson was any closer to putting this on the floor for a vote. He was still focused very heavily on trying to accomplish something vis-a-vis the border before he would even consider that, no?
I think that's absolutely right, Peter. This is very much up in the air. Speaker Johnson is still not making any commitments in terms of whether or when a foreign aid package that includes Ukraine funding will come to the floor, in part because, yes, government funding is his priority, but he's also facing very explicit threats to his job, to his speakership from the hard right rebels if he were to allow Ukraine aid to pass. This has become a real rallying cry on the right wing and the MAGA part of the Republican Party. And Johnson is facing a real squeeze here. This was clearly the most tense part of that White House meeting because everyone else in the room, including President Biden, including all the leaders on the Democratic side and Senator Mitch McConnell, were in favor of Ukraine aid. But Mike Johnson has not made any commitments. Chuck Schumer said if he doesn't do it, told Johnson if he doesn't do it, he will regret it for not only the next 2 years, but for the rest of his life.
Yeah, that's why a lot of lawmakers right now want to just allow for a vote and just see how many Democrats and Republicans would join. They feel very strongly that would have enough votes to pass, but Mike Johnson has to let that happen, and right now he's not going to do that. Sahil Kapoor on the Hill for us. Sahil, appreciate your analysis of all of that. And after this break, we are on the campaign trail as Nikki Haley pushes to stay in the race as long as she can against the former president. You're watching Meet the Press now. Our panel's coming up. Welcome back. Voters are voting, as we say. Today it's Michigan, but Nikki Haley's campaign is already looking past this. A week from now to Super Tuesday, campaigning today in Colorado, which is one of more than a dozen states holding nominating contests a week from today. A poor showing for Haley really could mean the end of her campaign. NBC News correspondent Ali Vitale has been traveling with the Haley campaign and has the very latest from Centennial, Colorado. Ali?
Hey, Peter, from Colorado, where Nikki Haley is continuing her sprint through the Super Tuesday finish here. She held 2 events in Michigan, departing that state just as voters were officially heading to the polls there. I have to tell you, on the Michigan front, it's one of those states that the Haley campaign often looks at and says, this is a place where they think they can build the right kind of a coalition. I've met Democrats, I've met independents, and certainly I've met Republicans who are no fans of Trump showing up at those Nikki Haley events that we were at in 2 stops in Michigan, both in the Detroit suburbs and then on through Grand Rapids. Those are exactly the kind of voters that I'm also meeting here in the outskirts of Denver, as Haley again makes that similar pitch, all steeped in the idea that she is the more electable candidate in a general election against President Joe Biden. Of course, as we've said before, and we'll need to say again, you don't get to a general without first getting through the primary. And for Haley, the reality of that becomes slimmer and slimmer by the day. The Republican apparatus clearly ready to move on and put themselves in out of a primary election posture and into a general election positioning with Trump as the nominee. But I got to tell you, voters I've spoken to in Michigan and now here in Colorado say they want to see Nikki Haley continue to stick it out and fight. That's exactly what Haley wants to hear, as she says she's going to be giving voters an alternative all the way down the calendar, at least through Super Tuesday. Peter?
Ali, thank you so much for that reporting. And joining us now is our panel. Eugene Daniels, White House correspondent for Politico and an NBC News political contributor. For the sake of it, we also brought Eugene Robinson, columnist at The Washington Post and also an NBC News political analyst. Sarah Chamberlain is with us as well. I hope your middle name's not Eugene.
It is not.
And CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership somewhere in Washington. Our friend Eugene Scott is probably saying, where the heck is my invitation? Sarah, let me start with you. Haley is arguing right now that the 40% of the votes that she got in New Hampshire, just shy of that in South Carolina, that's a big issue that Donald Trump should be worried about right now. I mean, in effect, he is an incumbent on the Republican side. How concerned Should the Trump folks be about that? And does she have a point there?
They should be very concerned because that is the Main Street Republicans. That is the group that he's losing. They're the suburban, well-educated people, so he needs to do some messaging to get them back in the fold. I think they could come back around. They certainly liked his policies. The issue that they have with him is his personality and some of the things he says. So, yes.
Eugene, I want to get your take on that as well. That 40% figure, it feels like a lot, right? Joe Biden in South Carolina got, what, 95-point-something%?
Yeah, if you look at the percentage of Haley voters who say they will not vote for Donald Trump, you do the calculation, you come up with something like 25% of Republican primary voters are saying they won't vote for Donald Trump. Now, I expect a lot of those Republicans to come home, but what if just half of them come home?
Well, it has the potential to be an erosion election, right?
You take a cut of 10, 12% in the Republican vote. That's a problem. So we'll see.
So let me get your take on this, Eugene, specifically as it relates to potential problems. One is for the current president of the United States, Joe Biden, right now. It's in the state of Michigan. We spoke within this hour to the Democratic Michigan leader, Abraham Aiyash. And he was making the argument that the Arab and Muslim American communities, basically need to hear more from this president. Not that their decision is made up for the fall right now, but they need to see more action, not just words from the president of the United States. What kind of alarm bells are sounding at the White House and at the campaign in Wilmington, given this uncommitted vote and the likelihood we actually see a pretty decent number tonight from them?
Yeah, they're watching it. They don't seem overly concerned. This isn't a group, as you well know, that gets overly concerned, or at least shows it.
Should they be?
I think so, because it shows cracks in what could be the base of the party come November, right? The same problem that Trump is going to have with those Main Street Republicans, this president's going to have with young voters, black and brown voters, Arab American, Muslim American voters across the country, right? Michigan is the first place where they can test that. And Michigan also already has this energy of uncommitted. I think no matter what the number is, unless it beats Joe Biden uncommitted, they're probably not going to do alarm bells, but they are paying a lot of attention to how to message that.
But the point about the Haley folks and then on the other side, the uncommitted folks, both candidates for president, Trump and Biden, look like they are eroding votes all over the place.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be like the best period for these two candidates right now. Once we get into the actual general election, one assumes that Democrats will tend to come home to Biden and Republicans will tend to come home to Trump, and we'll see who's left over. That remains to be seen. And I think there are a lot of twists and turns we can have. Just in terms of tonight, it's hard to have a benchmark. What is going to be an impressive uncommitted vote? Because there's nothing to really look back. I was looking back at previous results. In 2012, when Obama was the incumbent and unopposed, well, those were caucuses, not a primary. But uncommitted got 11%.
Yeah.
Against an incumbent, a popular incumbent president who was unopposed.
That's Barack Obama,
So don't be surprised. I mean, I would think that anything below that would be a huge victory.
Sarah, let me get your take right now as we look ahead to Thursday, right? There's another battleground, and that's the border. Frankly, you're going to have Joe Biden and Donald Trump both showing up at the border on the same day. Immigration, both of them feel like it's an issue they have some advantages on. Donald Trump thinks it's a no-brainer. This is a key issue for his campaign. Too many migrants, undocumented immigrants have come into the country. Joe Biden's making the argument, hey, we gave you a lot of concessions on a bipartisan border deal, and you guys turned it around. You guys are the problem here. Who has the advantage as we look at Thursday?
I actually still think the Republicans do because, yes, you guys would disagree with me, I'm sure, but they gave us some concessions, but not enough. They still were allowing 5,000 people to come over every day. They were going to move where you have the trials. They were going to move them to D.C. instead of in Texas. D.C. is the most liberal court in the country. So to put the immigrants through there is kind of a joke. It lets them all stay in the country.
I do agree with you. I do think Republicans have the upper hand here, mostly because of the messaging, right? This administration has not talked about or really wanted to work on immigration as much as they say they wanted to, and that was their first bill. They haven't done much on it. But the Republicans have over and over and over used immigration and undocumented immigrants as a cudgel. And once you have that base and that media ecosystem continues to use it, it's hard to pull that back. So Democrats are working at a disadvantage.
And it's still the number one issue.
Well, there are a lot of complexities here, right? Because if you just look at the number that are coming into the United States, you can say, this is outrageous, he's the president. But if you look at the efforts the president made and the recalcitrance, the reluctance of Republicans to go along with any of this effort, there's only so much he can do. You know well, Eugene, that executive orders aren't going to do it alone.
Yeah, executive orders are not going to do it alone. Mike Johnson is being disingenuous there, right? He says all along, we need a strong legislation, and then he said, we don't need laws. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But, but the messaging, I mean, that's an important thing, because I would think the White House would be leaning into this weakness rather than sort of shying away from it and turning it into a strength by saying, look, we gave you the bill. And you can argue about the merits of the bill and whether it's, but it is further than
James
Democrats
Langford
have,
supported the bill. He's a pretty conservative.
Exactly. Jim Langford. This is not a liberal, right? And this is not a liberal on immigration. So I wonder why they're not leaning into it more and why
Because
they're
they
not
never
talking
lean
about
into
it more.
anything.
Well,
Sorry.
there is that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
That is, Eugene, she makes a good point, Sarah does. Like, messaging is a real issue for this White House, right? In a lot of ways, the president, whatever you say, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable to focus on it, the issue of his age, the ability to deliver a clean soundbite, that kind of moment, right? This is something that they fundamentally are still sort of trying to work their way through.
Yeah, they've talked about it for years, right? They have failed to tell their story to the American people. There's always like this kickstart. We're going to do it now. We're going to do it now. And it never really happens. Or it happens and it's not consistent. And that is where Republicans are much better at messaging, because when they pick a message, they stick with it. And they continue across the ecosystem. That is not something that Democrats or this White House have done well for the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting several days. I mean, it literally feels like, think of all the different things that have occurred in the course of the last 6 months. And we got more than 6 months to go right now. Israel was not even a topic 6 months ago. So just get ready for the whole conversation to twist and turn as we go forward. Eugene Daniels, Eugene Robinson, Sarah Chamberlain, thank goodness you were here to make it easier for all of us to keep track. Thank you for being with us this hour. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press. Now the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.